I would like this evening to open our Sunday sermon with a poem written by Rabindranath Tagore. In view of our forthcoming pilgrimage to Darjeeling, India, we feel that this is appropriate. Rabindranath, O Aurobindo bows to thee, O friend, my country's friend, O voice incarnate free of India's soul. No soft renown doth crown thy lot, nor pelf or careless comfort is for thee. Thou sought no petty bounty, petty dole, the beggar's bowl. Thou ne'er hast held aloft, in watchfulness thy soul hast thou e'er held for bondless full perfection's birth, for which all night and day the God in man on earth doth strive and strain austerely, which in solemn voice the poet sings in thunderous poems, for which rejoice stout heart to march on perilous paths, before whose flame refulgent ease bows down its head in humbled shame, and death forgetteth fear, that gift supreme to thee from heaven's own hand, that full-orbed, fadeless dream that's thine, thou asked for as thy country's own desire, in quenchless hope, in words with truth's white flame afire, in infinite faith hath God in heaven heard at last this prayer of thine, and so sounds there in blast on blast his victory trumpet, and puts he with love austere in thy right hand today the fateful lamp and drear of sorrow, whose light doth pierce the country's age-long gloom, and in the infinite skies doth steadfast shine and loom, as doth the northern star. O victory and hail! Where is the coward who will shed tears today, or wail, or quake in fear? And who will belittle truth to seek his own small safety? Where's the spineless creature weak, who will not in thy pain his strength and courage find? O wipe away those tears, O thou of craven mind, the fiery messenger that with the lamp of God hath come. Where is the king who can with chain or rod chastise him, chains that were to bind salute his feet, and prisons greet him as their guest with welcome sweet, the pall of gloom that wraps the sun in noontide skies, in dim eclipse, within a moment slips and flies, as doth a shadow, punishment, it ever falls on him who is no man, and every day hath feared, abashed, to gaze on truth's face with a free man's eye, and call a wrong, on him who doth deny his manhood shamelessly before his own compeers, and ere disowns his God-given rights, impelled by fears and greeds, who on his degradation prides himself, who traffics in his country's shame, whose bread, whose pelf are his own mother's gore, that coward sits and quails in jail without reprieve, outside all human jails. When I behold thy face mid bondage, pain, and wrong, and black indignities, I hear the soul's great song of rapture unconfined, the chant the pilgrim sings, in which exultant hope's immortal splendor rings, solemn voice and calm and heart consoling, grand, of imperturbable death, the spirit of Bharat land. O poet, hath placed upon thy face her eyes of fire, with love, and struck vast chords upon her vibrant lyre, wherein there is no note of sorrow, shame, or fear, or penury, or want. And so today I hear the ocean's restless roar, borne by the stormy wind. The impetuous fountains dance riotous, swift and blind, bursting its rocky cage. The voice of thunder deep, awakening like a clarion call, the clouds asleep, amid this song triumphant vast that encircles me. Rabindranath, O Aurobindo, bows to thee, and then to him I bow, who in his sport doth make new worlds in fiery disillusion's awful wake. From death awakes new life, in danger's bosom rears prosperity, and sends his devotee in tears mid desolation's thorn, amid his foes to fight, alone and empty-handed in the gloom of night. in divers tongues, in divers ages, speaketh ever, in every mighty deed, in every great endeavor, and true experience, sorrows not, howe'er drear, and pain is not, and harm is not, and not all fear. The king's a shadow, punishment is but a breath. Where is the tyranny of wrong, and where is death? O fool, O coward, raise thy head that's bowed in fear. I am, thou art, and everlasting truth is here. This was written by Rabindranath Tagore. And I think that it may give some indice of our subject of this eve. For we would speak tonight about time, Kal, in the Sanskrit, and space, Desh, in the Sanskrit, and of the intermingling of time and space. And we would speak of it in terms of past history and the future, or that which is to be, and the fulfillment of the cycles of life. For we have found ourselves not too long ago sitting in a high chair and drooling out our oatmeal upon our chin. And now we are here quite a ways from that particular sorry state. And we are supposed to have a greater knowledge, a higher concept of what life is all about, so that we can teach our children. As that old song goes, Mother, teach thy children. And every one of us is a teacher. But we sometimes forget that we have this role to play. We sometimes think of ourselves as only someone who is taught by tyrants, as though life is a tyrant, as though our teachers are tyrants, as though everything is in a state where we ought to rebel against it. And then we suddenly stop and we pause, and we begin to realize the same thing that I begun to realize long ago, that the meanest teacher I ever had in school, my Latin teacher, was in reality the one who taught me the most. And so we sometimes ask ourselves this question: is what we really want a sweet and beautiful personality that will pat us on the back and say, yes, you have learned all your lessons, Johnny. Mary, you know everything. You're just wonderful. When in reality, we're down in the D class. Shouldn't we look up then to those who may seem to us, by reason of their diligence and desire to chasten our soul as God himself does, as those who are our instructors, teaching us the best things in life that are free, but that are meaningless to us unless we accept them? And so we do not rebel, but we welcome the chastening rod that speaks in the Lord's name and says to us, whom I love, I chasten. Let us then stop for a moment and begin to think in terms of thought. Yes, think in terms of thought. What is thought? We have heard of the ancient Thoth, the Atlantean, the great master Thoth. And we come to realize, if we pause to think upon the relationship of words, that thought and Thoth are perhaps one, that the word thought may have even sprung from his name. But whether it did or not is not so important as the fact that we are endowed with the capacity to think. Yet this great think tank that we have here and this great think tank that we have here are not always functioning together as they are supposed to do. For you see, man is supposed to think with both his head and his heart. And what happens is that he primarily separates the heart and the head. And we find that the heart or the feelings of man lead the head. And so in almost every case where you are dealing with motivation, for example, in the field of salesmanship, and you want to sell someone something, so you appeal to their head and you say, well, this particular product is going to do you a lot of good, but you don't get very enthusiastic about it, and you cite some facts and figures and graphs and everyone looks cold, and as though nothing has happened really, and nothing has. And then, suddenly after a while, you begin to get the idea, you get the message of the heart. You begin to wax enthusiastic. And in your enthusiasm, you are creating an infectious feeling which is easily picked up by anyone, that you are moving emotionally. And what is emotion? It is energy in motion. You have created a feeling, and wherever there is a feeling created, the feeling will always lead the head every time and will win every time. So, if the husband is thinking with his head and the wife is feeling with her heart, the wife will have her way. But if the reverse is true, strange as it may seem, he will have his way. And this is always the case. It's the heart that leads. But it is not intended really to be just that way. We are supposed to learn to think with our heart and govern our feelings, so that we are not always carried away by the tides of emotion, but we are able to feel with our head and think with our heart and do both in both places. And then we have a great duality going for us and a masterful situation where we are in command of ourselves totally. We are our own man or our own woman. We are able to think the way God wants us to think with our head, to think with our heart, to feel with our head, and to feel with our heart. For we can learn to do this, strange as it may seem. Now, in connection then with thought, I am going to ask you all, everyone in this room, barring none, to think with me as we begin to explore the great sphere of reality that is made known to us because of the avenues of our five senses. We have five senses, and they telegraph to the inward part of ourself what is taking place. They reveal the world to us, but they only reveal a part of it. For unless we have the endowment of the open capacities of the higher senses, such as are stated in this particularly significant statement, which probably only a few of you will understand, but I'll give it to you anyway because the rest of you will puzzle over it for so long that you'll finally come to the point where you'll realize what it is too. And so then, we come to the place where we are going to climb the 33 steps of the spinal ladder to the place of the skull, Golgotha, where the Christ is crucified between the two malefactors, the anterior and posterior lobes of the pituitary gland. Now, you think about that for a moment, and then if you can't solve the mystery of it, then you decide that you're going to search further until you can solve the mystery of it, because it is filled with significance for each individual, and it correlates to the blossoming of the spiritual flowers on the spinal stalk. And these are the great centers. The great centers culminating in the 1,000-petal lotus of light here, right where the brain is resting, in the skull. For that 1,000-petal lotus of light, when it opens up, it reveals the whole universe to man. There is absolutely nothing then hidden from one's eyes, but the full penetrability of the inward man reaching out and perceiving all things in the light of just what all things are. Now, unfortunately, many people like to be very pragmatic. They like to think just in terms of right now. And this, of course, is very good. It has its values. But sometimes it does not give a clear picture of just what has happened or what is happening to us. And we're interested not in a bubble that's floating in a level that is almost infinite in its horizontal plane. But we want to know the relationship of this bubble to the plane, to the instrument we are using. If we're using a carpenter's plumb, or if we're using a level, we want to know just where that bubble is in relationship to the center of it, you see. And unless we have some arbitrary markings upon the scale of our judgment, our values will be very warped, because we will see either through the eyes of contemporary society or we will read and read as other people read, but never read to think beyond what other people are thinking. We will be achieving what is known as mediocrity. And I cannot believe that it is God's will that man endowed with his image is intended to think in terms of mediocrity. We are intended to think big, to think gigantic thoughts, but to tether it all to reality. And this reality has already been established for us. We are not in a world where reality does not exist. There are those who have come to this planet and had the oatmeal drooling down their chins, just the same as we did, who today are spiritual masters, masters of themselves and of their destiny. And they walked once amongst us, and today they are still in contact with us. In fact, this very evening at the conclusion of this service, you are going to hear from one of these masters through the medium of the tape of this morning, which was made during the master's dictation. And you will have the opportunity of hearing from this master in Darjeeling, India. And you may, if your centers, your spiritual centers within yourself, the little transformers that God has all wrapped up inside of you, that are much more important than these that are out on the telephone poles, if you have these transformers, you will feel the cosmic energy flowing through this room, and it will pass through you, and you'll know it. If your centers are closed, you may not feel it, but you'll hear his words, and you'll understand, I hope, some of them and the great significance that he is trying to convey to us in these times of testing. So now we come to the point of time, which we will deal with first, this this infinite calculation of the finite. Because you see, all we can ever do with a piece of string that represents all known history is break it up into segments. We call them years. We take this piece of string and we arbitrarily mark on it. We say this is such and such a year and this is such and such a year. 2,000 years ago Christ was born. We put that back on the string 2,000 years ago. Well, on this part of the string now, where we come to the end of history, right today, we have another string. We don't tie them together, but we just stretch this one out in this direction because it's a linear movement. It's forward moving. And now we realize that we really don't know just what is going to happen. Because as Kal-Desh in his book, The Prophet, says, we live both in the crystal and we live in the mist. And who can say that the crystal is not the mist in a state of decay? So then you see, there are some people who have this little idea in their brain. They say to themselves, well, what I think is not so important. It's what I do. And what am I going to tell you tonight? I'm going to tell you tonight that what you think is important and what you do is also important. And I'm going to show it to you by Kal-Desh's statement. Because you see, let us take a man who thinks the evil thought of adultery. Now, if this man commits the deed, according to the scriptures, a man who thinks of a woman in his heart has already committed adultery with her. Jesus said this. Remember this now. Jesus said it. If he thinks it in his heart, he's already committed it. So one man said to me one day, well, he said, it doesn't make any difference if I commit it because I've already thought it and therefore I'm committed to it. And this is where I wish to prove to you that this is wrong in thinking. The man is wrong in thinking it. We are wrong in thinking it. We live in the crystal and in the mist. Now, when we live in the mist is the state of thought, where a man is beginning the thought processes. Just as Judas Iscariot decided that he was going to betray Christ. He was in the mist. But the Master said to him, that which thou doest, do quickly. And he sent him out, and he betrayed him, you see. Now, when he betrayed him, that was crystallization. The mist of thought had now crystallized and could not be changed. It is unalterable. And I want to point out to you that no matter what the deed you may plan, as long as it is not crystallized into action, there is still hope that you will not have the karma or the debt against someone for the deed that you have committed against someone. So you see, a man is most wise not to let himself, first of all, fall into the pitfall of wrong thought. But if he finds himself in wrong thought, as the Master has said, he says you can't help it if a bird lands on your head. But he says you don't have to let him build a nest in your hair. And that's the whole idea for all of us, to control and to guide ourselves, is to realize we live in the midst of thought, which we shall always seek control over. But it is far better, when we come to the realm of crystallization of thought, to watch our deeds that are going to manifest in the arena of action. Because karma for thought is still not as great as karma for action, which touches the lives of other people. As long as it's just our own thought, it still is error, but it can be purified and taken out of consciousness by correct application to cosmic law. Now this is, of course, a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing that there is hope for people after they've erred. There's hope for people before they've erred. But I still think that an ounce of prevention, as my mother told me, is worth a pound of cure. Don't you? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Now then, enough with human consciousness. Just ordinary human consciousness of doing things. We're all doing things all the time. Let's begin to look at this grand world. Let's look out in history and all the way back to the very foundation. We can go back to Babylon and the hanging gardens of Babylon. We can see the great Tower of Babel. We can still, in thought, perceive Sodom and Gomorrah. We can do like Risa Stevens did on the stage at the Met, where she was singing and suddenly the whole audience disappeared. And she was in an arena in Rome, and her arias were ringing out there as she went back in consciousness to her past lives when she was in Rome. For many of us, you see, have roamed the past. We have lived in the past. And we live in the present. And we hope to live in the future. But the future cannot be any better for us than the present and the past. The past has its effects upon our lives. So when we go through this time sequence, as we look back to the past, we may realize that we had our home in the past. Most of us like to think in terms of this particular embodiment, this life. We like to think in terms of our mother and our father and the old homestead. And in the good old days, some people go back to the horse and buggy days in this room, and some remember the Model T and some the Model A, and some, of course, have a little different background. They only remember television. But we all go back somewhere into the past. And some of us can go back further than others. We can go back into these crumbling bricks of Babylon. We can go back into the ancient pyramids. We can go back to many countries and many climes with our memories. And they reveal to us many things. Some of us walked where Jesus walked. Some of us can remember Golgotha literally. Some of us can remember other times and other places. We were in various enterprises throughout history. Some people here were in the War of Roses. Some remember King Henry VIII. Some probably sailed the seas with Christopher Columbus. Others, of course, have been beggars. Some have been princes. Some have been queens. Some have been kings. We have been many things, and we have not always been on top nor always on the bottom. Sometimes we've been in the middle, and sometimes we've been caught in between. We've had lots of different situations in the past. And the future will, of course, be exactly what we make it. This is why the masters are so interested in our consciousness, in the consciousness that we have that can penetrate through all of the past and then look to the future with the idea of planning the future. I think it's a great tragedy that most of us live from day to day. I mean, we get up each day and we say, I wonder just what this day is going to bring forth in time for me. What is it going to bring forth? Well, we say we don't know. Isn't that a great tragedy that we have so little governing power over our lives as to say that we don't know? Don't you think when God said to man, multiply and replenish the earth, take dominion over the earth, in other words, rule the earth, don't you think it's a great tragedy that we don't even know each day what is going to happen to us, but we just sit back and wait and decide that that future time is going to be a great mystery, that we can never pull the veil back and penetrate this mystery? Well, we can. Through the Master's teachings, through the spiritual insight, we can look ahead. And not only can we look ahead, we can plan ahead. We can make things happen. Someone said that there were 2 or 3 different kinds of people. I'm trying to recall it exactly as it was said. He said there's the people who make things happen, there's the people who watch them happen, and then there was something else, and I've forgotten what the other one was, but it doesn't make any difference, because we're interested primarily in the fact that some people make things happen, other people watch them happen. Now we're interested then in being able to make things happen. Now, is this wrong? Does God blame us for making things happen? On the contrary, He blames us for just watching them happen. Because when we watch them happen, we are not participating at all in the constructivism that is dormant within ourselves. Oh, you say you don't have any power within yourself? Well, I'm not going to call you any ugly names, but I'm going to assure you that if you follow on long enough with the teachings of the Masters will prove to you without any question whatsoever that this is absolutely true. Absolutely true. That you have to be able to make things happen in your world. And when you can do it, why then, you see, you can govern your life. And your future can be tailor-made just the way you want it. But of course, then people come up with this question. Well, how will I want it? And how will I know how I want it? I don't even know how I want it. You see, it's like giving someone $1 million. You give them $1 million, and they're overwhelmed with the gift, but they don't know what to do with it. Oh, of course, everybody says, oh, I know what I'd do with it if I had $1 million. And they can think of all kinds of things that they would do with that money. But you see, it isn't quite that easy. Now, I can't speak from the experience of having had someone give me $1 million, but I've had people give me a great deal, and I've had a great deal brought to me in the course of my life, and I have sometimes in my life walked into stores and really not known just what to do to spend a certain amount of money that I had in my pocket that I thought I ought to spend. And yet, you know what the biggest problem was? It was the problem of so many wants, so many desires, that it became a question of what shall I actually select from this amount of money, because I don't have enough to actually meet all my needs. What will I pick out? What can I buy? And the ideas would come so thick and fast, it was like a blizzard. You know, you're in a snowstorm, and you just, like this, and you're batted from one side of the store to the other, and finally you go home with the money in your pocket yet. It was burning a hole in your pocket when you came into the store, and you go home with it in your pocket, and you say, well, I guess I'd rather have the money than anything, because you can't settle on any one thing that you really want. And this shows that man has a real problem. And his real problem is to be able to school his desire, to be able to master this chaotic condition of the mind, where he cannot really solidify upon one particular thing that he feels is most important in his life. I think then that all of us should stop for a while the business of just thinking chaotically and just thinking in what we'll call the stream of consciousness. Most people think in the stream of consciousness. And do you know that the stream of consciousness is very muddy, because it has dumped into it human refuse from all over the world, human ideas. And we have to learn to protect our aura and our consciousness against the negative thoughts of the world and be able to exclude them from our consciousness so that we can build great positive passions for what God wants us to have for ourselves. Otherwise, you see, we cannot even receive the gifts that God has to give to us. He's got all kinds of gifts to give to us, and He's right ready to hand them to us. and we cannot receive them until we have purified our desires. Do you understand this? Does this make any sense to you at all? That desire is important, but you see, desire is a key, because it's composed of this: desira. D is God, and what is Sira? It's the Son of God, you see. God and the Son of God. Desire, the sire, in other words. So what have we got to do? We have got to learn to realize that our thoughts, that we are acting creatively as God acts creatively. That we are creators of our destiny. And that by making our thoughts our sons and daughters, we can actually produce in our world what we want to produce. Now, I hope this isn't way over your head. I'm trying not to make it so. But a thought that you create is an offspring of your mind, and the way you create it is the same way that Leonardo da Vinci created. You have got to learn how to create, and this requires the purification of the mind. This is why the body should be kept clean, because a clean body breeds clean thought. This is why whatever you feed the mind should be glorious, should be miraculous, should be beautiful, should be wise, should be comforting to humanity, should produce something good in the world. Do you see how clearly I'm trying to portray this to you, how important it is that you grasp this thought? Because through this thought you can purify your own concepts. And then you see this world of time becomes a world where you can step from the present into the past. Well, you can't change that. That's the crystal. But you can step here over into the mist, and you can change that in the future. And I don't care what you have been in the past, how weak you've been, how you failed, or what you haven't discovered yet. I'm interested in awakening and quickening within you the realization that the power of God in yourself has every answer that you need for every human problem. I don't care what that problem is. God has the answer. And the answer, of course, can be better conveyed if we understand the teachings of the Masters. For example, the violet transmuting flame, which we have over here as a symbol. If you can understand the chart of the presence, you can understand your mighty God presence, its relation to the Christ of your being, the Logos, and, of course, to your human self and its great needs for transmutation. The world, as Robert Louis Stevenson said, the world is so full of a number of things, I am sure we should all be as happy as kings. But we aren't, are we? Look around you on the street as people walk up and down the street. Park your car sometime, and then, or park your carcass in your car, and as you sit there, just look at the people's faces. And if you don't think that's entertaining, well, I can remember in Sutton, Nebraska one time during World War II that I went down in the main street of the town there, and as I walked down the street in my little military uniform, everybody in town that was parked along the street was looking at me. Now, I wasn't just embarrassed or self-conscious, they actually were looking. So I decided to get into one of the cars and sit there too. And I sat there, and as I was sitting in one of these cars looking at the people, I noticed the faces of the people coming by. And I realized that this was really a very entertaining situation. It was a substitute for going to the movies. And it was much cheaper besides. Then after a while they went into the restaurant, they had a cup of coffee and some sandwiches, and they relaxed a little bit after they'd had their entertainment. Well, it's really interesting when you stop and think of just how people function. The human animal has become just that, an animal in the zoo on exhibit. And I cannot believe that Almighty God that framed this universe and made this whole beautiful star and all the stars and planets out in space ever intended human beings that He put here to take dominion over this planet to function the way they are functioning today. In fact, I don't guess at it. I know that they're not supposed to be the kind of people they are today. We're not supposed to have war. We're not supposed to have human greed. We're not supposed to have unkindness between people. We're not supposed to have bad motives. We're supposed to have good motives, but we don't have it. And failure is everywhere around us today in the world. And of course, many more people love the Beatles than love Christ, so the Beatles tell us. But somehow or other, I don't believe that, because I know I don't love the Beatles. I may love their souls, but I certainly don't love the Beatles, nor I don't love their phonograph records. And I don't love to stick a hypodermic needle in my arm in order to give me a kick. In fact, all I have to do is look up, and I already have my kick for the day and for all the days to come. Because if you look up at your presence, when you learn to look up to your God presence, and realize that that is the only real part of yourself, then you're going to look back and you're going to say, well, I guess when I was a baby, I really wasn't what God wanted me to be. That oatmeal again. And toddling along. I mean, we needed some support in those days, or we fell flat on our faces. And then we had to learn to take our poor little hands and put them on the desk and learn to write and cramp the fingers. And we had to go through the beatings on the schoolyard that many of the young people take. And we had to go through fear of a beating at home if the report card wasn't up to the standards that father and mother thought it would be. And all kinds of experiences. We were exposed to theft, where people tried to induce us to steal in the dime stores and stores. We were exposed to bad pictures and ugly objects. We've had all kinds of struggles toward morality, toward decency, toward God. We've been living in a time today when everybody is pulled this way and then they're pulled that way. And sometimes people don't know which way to go. Some people have had no experience in the church. Some people have had no experience with God. Other people have had a lot of interesting experiences with God, enough that they're a little burned by the church. And they don't exactly like the idea of some of the churches where they're trying to tell them that if they don't be good, they're going to go to Hades and burn forever on some kind of a spit, roasted like a turkey on Thanksgiving Day. And I can't accept this idea, because I know that God doesn't intend to do this to anybody simply because as a father I wouldn't do it to my own children, and I'm sure that I'm not better than God, you see. Now, we've talked a little about time and the stream of time. I'd like to talk briefly upon space. We always think of space in terms of great vastness. And if you take a trip across America by car, you have some idea of just how big this country is. It's a huge country. And then if you go across it by plane, in a jet, especially if you go from California to New York, you seem to be annihilating space by speed. Well, they tell us that when you annihilate space by speed, in a way you annihilate time. And this is quite an experience in physics and higher mathematics. But as I understand it, if we were to take off in a spaceship from this planet and go to some star so many light years away in such and such a period of time and then come back, that even though only a few months would elapse, and I'm not trying to figure this mathematically, but if a certain length of time elapsed, we'll say 5 years elapsed, at the time you got back to this planet, because of this spatial, whatever you want to call it, warp or woof or whatever it is, when you got back here, all the people that you knew would be dead because 100 years would have passed. Is this correct? This is the basic idea. So you see, it's not just the way you think it is. I mean, you have an idea if you go out here from point A, the Earth, to point B out in space, and you travel out there at a certain speed and then come back, that everybody would only be 5 years older because you're only 5 years older. But this would not be true. You'd have the people here maybe 100 years older. Therefore, most of them would be dead and an entire new generation would be living here. You'd come back and only 5 years of your life would have passed by. But this is a little bit of a ridiculous picture, yet it is a true one, which gives an idea of the second coming of Christ. People talk in terms of the second coming of Christ, and they say, well, Christ is coming back to this earth again. Well, I hope so. But they think of it in this way. They say that a cloud is coming, and it's coming out of the east, and they don't even know what the cloud is, and they don't even know what the east is. But they say it's coming out of the east, and it's going to be here somewhere up in the eastern sky, And Christ's going to be sitting upon it, and then all the people in the world that are now alive are going to be able to see him. When, if you know anything about logistics and the crowding of people into space, you know that if you were standing on top of the Washington Monument and you had all the people that live in New York around you, they couldn't even see you from a distance. As you got out to the periphery of that group of people, they wouldn't see you and you wouldn't see them. So you have to begin to understand that many of the scriptural references are very significant only in terms of the individual, you and I as a person. It's a matter of our realization of what we learn, what we know, what we are. Do you think for 1 minute that if you had ascended with Jesus from Bethany's hill, if you'd been standing right beside him, and the two of you, take anybody in this audience, one of you then had been standing by Jesus, and you'd both gone up together, do you think that you'd be dead now? Of course not. Jesus said, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of hell and of death. We have to understand then that the second coming of Christ does not have to occur in the worldly sense that he comes floating on a big white cloud that everybody down here looks up and they see him like they would the Hindenburg dirigible or something floating through space. They have to understand that the second coming of Christ is specifically the event that occurs because the hearts of men have prepared themselves to receive him in all generations, not only in this one, but in all generations. Otherwise the everlasting gospel could not be preached. How could you preach the everlasting gospel if he came 100 years ago and we were living now? If Christ had come 100 years ago in time and we're living now, where would we stand then if he'd come and gone? Or if he was still here ruling everything, supposedly, as they sometimes think of it, well then, of course, people wouldn't have any free will, would they? If he ruled it all, if he made them do exactly what he wanted them to do, he would be taking away from them their free will. When this planet achieves its immortal perfection, it will be because man has accepted the fiat of Almighty God, because man has recognized the great creative potential that is inside of him, and he's begun to exercise it. As he begins to exercise that prerogative, that spiritual prerogative, then you see he achieves greatness. Now Rabindranath Tagore achieved a certain greatness in the field of the poet. He was a great poet. We have had many great poets in the world. We've had many great sculptors. We've had great teachers. We've had great doctors. We've had great avatars, mighty souls that brought truth to humanity and awakened people. But my goodness, none of them have been able to save the world. Tagore can't save the world. I can't save the world. You can't save the world. Each individual in the final end, and I'm saying this to the little children that are here tonight, each one of us has to ourselves take the gift that God has given, the gift of life first of all, to reach out and realize that we're natives of eternity, that we're here in this universe, we're in this mighty soundless sound stream, we're in it, and we've got to listen to it and vibrate with the cosmic sound. We've got to vibrate with the cosmic logos, the lost word. We've got to let the word begin to move in our lives. And when that word moves, we will be moved by God's intention. And when we do, we will learn how to control our thoughts. If you can't control your thoughts, if your thoughts are going to wander around like one of these will-o'-the-wisps on a swamp, wherever it wants to go or happens to go, nothing is really happening at all except chaos. And we're a part of chaos. Tiamat, the great dragon of chaos, is eating us up, devouring us. And God is not glorified in it because he cannot be glorified in chaos, because God is order. And this is why the ancient brotherhoods established the fiat of order. They established the fiat of order because only by obedience and by order and by a quickening in consciousness can man achieve the brilliance of the mind of God in his own mind. And when he does, there are changes that he will wrought in the world. This is the fire that has been forever and forever central to the throne of God, and I said it purposely like the old Scotchman, throne, because I wanted to illustrate the three-in-one power of the threefold flame of love, wisdom, and power in man. The three-in-one, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the body, the mind, and the soul, these different triune aspects. And when we understand them according to the law of the triangle, we can see that by trying to fit ourselves into these great hierarchies of light that have been established long before we ever knew who we were, if we can fit ourselves into those great procedures, let's call them a procedure, we are going to have experiences like the ancient masters have had. We will not be just ordinary people. We will be people, believe this or not, that could stand here and disappear right in front of your eyes. We'll be people that in the body or out of the body could go to the ancient temples in Egypt and in the everlasting hills, wherever there are great temples, and hear the great mystic songs of the masters and the music of the spheres. We will be able to absorb the light of eternity right here in time, and we will be able to enjoy ourselves 1,000 times more, 1,000,000 times more, infinitely more than we ever possibly could in this rat race we call human life, which has been made a rat race because everybody is trying to rush around in their horseless chariots, running around with hopefully 2 lights and a tail light on, maybe 2 tail lights, and a little aerial sticking up, listening to some radio station that's putting out acid rock and roll, and you go down the street and you see the boys with long hair going around bouncing up and down, probably injected with acid, LSD, STP, and God only knows what else. And they're going down the street not knowing where they're going, and sometimes they bump into people. But then that happens to the same element of our society too, doesn't it? They bump into people also. So you see, I won't be able tonight to give you very much more than I've already given you, because for goodness sakes it's 10 after 9 and I'm supposed to quit at 9 o'clock. So I've gone 10 minutes over what I'm supposed to, and the only reason I did was because we had this gigantic 35-minute tape which we had to play for some of our new guests. So about all I can do is tell you that I hope that you will have success in getting rid of this great dragon Tiamat and learn to bring order out of your lives, and I can promise you that you can learn a great deal about that here if you want to.